So, Congresswoman Comstock, I wonder what went through your mind when you heard those comments, and how might they sway Republican women who have yet to vote? They've been a big focus of Kamala Harris.
Well, listen, you have Vice President Harris welcoming Republicans, welcoming Nikki Haley voters, saying she's going to put a Republican in her cabinet, building this large coalition at the same time that Donald Trump continues his threats and dangerous, vile language that puts people in danger. You know, you just talked to Al Schmidt, whose own life was put in danger before, and all these election workers whose life is in danger. Donald Trump knows when he talks like this that death threats comes to those of us who speak out against him because he is a petty tyrant. And, Adam Kinzinger has had death threats. Of course, Liz has, and election workers in these swing states at this critical time. So we need to turn the page. And at a time when the vice president is being so inviting and building this big coalition, those of us who worked for Republican presidents, Bush, Reagan, and Governor Romney and John McCain, we are all coming together because we know we need to turn the page from somebody who has been doing this for years and stoking these lies and this violence and putting so many people in danger.
So, Jeremy, as you know, the way that he tries to push back against folks like Congresswoman Comstock and Liz Cheney and Mark Milley and anybody who goes out against him is to say that their worldview, and I'm not attributing this worldview to the Congresswoman, is that they want to get into wars and they want to be interventionists. They want to put American lives in danger. He started this, and it worked for him in 2016 when he said that George Bush lied to get America into war. He gained a lot of trust within that body of voters that like him because he said something that people weren't saying publicly at the time. Republicans weren't saying publicly. He's now used that trust to say that anybody who goes against me is just that same worldview you saw back in the early 2000s. These are the people that want to get us into war. Why does it still work? From your conversations with folks out there, why does he still have so much trust on this issue?
I think it's less an issue of war now that there are fewer and fewer American troops being sent overseas and people aren't seeing the impacts of just how traumatic that has been for anybody sent overseas. I think it has to do with the government spending money. What you hear from voters is, why are they spending money on these foreign interventions, be it Ukraine or Israel, Gaza? I want that money spent on me. The idea that Republicans are, budget hawks and fiscally responsible, we've seen that is false with the deficit just ballooning under Trump with these tax cuts and all the other spending.
He would increase the defense budget. He's not going to decrease it.
Right. Of course. Yeah. I would think any president probably would. Right. It's very hard to cut. But what I'm saying is they want that money spent on them. They're fine in Republicans, despite their talk of being aggressive fiscally and hawkish there, they don't mind if the money is going toward their voters. They just don't want it spent on projects they don't happen to like, and Ukraine is one of them.
Do you think that this kind of language is going to drive enthusiasm by Democrats, Basil? Do you see, anger among Democrats about it? Because Republicans, well, it's arguable whether Republicans are going to come to Liz Cheney's defense, because it seems that the violent language that Donald Trump has used, and we've read it most recently as well in Bob Woodward's book, we hear it from Milley, we heard from Esper, from others, Republicans and generals, and people don't seem to react. Is this become normalized? And people are saying, well, he won't be like that when he gets into office.
Well, I do think that Americans are inured to some kind of violence, unfortunately, in our society. We take some of it with a grain of salt, sadly. If you look at some of the mass shootings, the sheer number of them that we've experienced, even within the last several years, has almost become regular in our society, and that is incredibly unfortunate. But when you tie that to a lot of the language that Donald Trump uses, On the one hand, to your point earlier, to your question earlier, Katie, I think, there was a segment of the population that enjoyed the fact that he was a political disruptor of some kind.
He was willing to say the ugly truth that they knew people were saying privately, but not saying publicly.
That's exactly right. But we've come to understand that that political disruption has consequences. When you push past the guidelines and the guardrails, it has consequences. When you're putting people on courts that change policy for over a generation, it has consequences. And so I do believe that Democrats are incredibly afraid and scared for the future, because they understand the future in Donald Trump's hands is going to be significantly worse than anything they've ever experienced.
Do you want to let Barbara? Do you want to jump in on this? I know you were trying to.
And I want to ask Barbara a quick question.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it is working, because I know both in 2020 and now, I think even more so in 2024, when I've talked to a lot of even Republican members who served in his administration, at the Defense Department, even young men, I have former staffers of mine who are now in the military, they've already voted for Kamala Harris. When I've been in Pennsylvania, when I've gone to events, some of the Republicans for Harris events, the very people who are there are veterans who are talking to their fellow veterans because they are so disgusted by Donald Trump's attacks on our military, the suckers and losers. They believe John Kelly and General Milley. They've seen personally how Donald Trump talks about members of our military. So they get it. Even if the press hasn't really been reporting on it and letting Donald Trump play his games and distract, and you've had Republicans ignore it, some of the elected Republicans, these veterans get it. And when they see a guy who, had his bone spurs and got out of service himself, they get it.
Well, I was just going to say, actually, the press has been covering it this time around. Jeremy's paper has done whole pages of the extreme language, and we've certainly reported every day. Other networks have as well. But, Congresswoman, there's the dog that hasn't barked, and that's George W. Bush. And when you have Liz Cheney, her father, all of these generals, General Mattis, General Kelly, finally speaking out. Barbara Bush. George Herbert Walker Bush voted for Hillary Clinton and did that publicly, Bush 41. So a lot of people are asking me and other reporters, where is George W. Bush? And I'm just wondering what your takeaway is on that.
Well, listen, we know none of these people are voting for Donald Trump. I think it pretty much tells you where they're at. His own vice president and most of his cabinet are not voting for him. This is unique. I mean, the man is a felon. The man has been adjudicated guilty of, sexual assault in a civil case. I mean, this is a, very unique situation where he doesn't have most of, people who ever ran for president or vice president aren't standing with him. The former Speaker of the House in Wisconsin, a swing state, is not standing with him, has publicly said he's not voting for him. So you can pretty much figure out where these people are at. In Pennsylvania, you have a lot of former electeds who are not standing with him, many of them public, some not, but they aren't with him. And yet he's out there with, 9/11 deniers like Laura Loomer, the type of people he has surrounded himself with, that so-called comic who is attacking our fellow Puerto Rican Americans, and he never apologizes for it. The Archbishop of Puerto Rico said, you've got to apologize for this. You've got to tell the American people that you don't agree with this. Yet everyone goes out and makes excuses for him. This is unacceptable, and it's un-American, and we've got to turn the page. And that's what Kamala Harris is doing as she's uniting and bringing this unbelievably unique coalition of a lot of national security conservatives. That's why she has so many national security conservatives, because they realize how unstable and unhinged this man is. When you watch that whole interview last night, not just what he said about Liz Cheney that was so disturbing, but he was rambling, not really awake the day before, and is driving around in circles in the garbage truck where he was slipping and sliding, trying to get in. The man is not well mentally or physically, and it should disturb the American people to put his hand on the nuclear button again. And that's why so many people in his own cabinet, the people who know him best, are saying, please turn the page. Come with us. Realize, this is not good for 4 more years.